HR supply chain, highlighting and showcasing solutions for the most complex challenges facing the industry in 21st century by our team of subject matter experts and mentors. Broadcasting every week, all year round, we will present the most up-to-date series of podcasts and webinars.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Bicara Supply Chain. This is Nur Hadi House. And today we can talk about the quick wins, optimize your supply chain costs. And with me now, Andreas, he is an expert in supply chain optimization and supply chain automations. Andreas is also the CEO of a company called A&K-Group, which is a specialist in the design and the optimization of the market, synchronized supply production chains, and the automation of all related planning processes. Thanks for coming and welcome to the show, Andreas.
Thanks very much, Nahadi, for having me here today.
Okay, awesome. So before we get in there, can you please brief a bit about yourself, your professional background, and what are you doing at the A&K Group?
Okay, yeah. Let me make a long story short. I'm in business for quite some years. Meanwhile, I studied mechanical engineering and economics and started my career as a research engineer at the university in Germany, in Aachen, close to Cologne. Then I've been working in corporate restructuring business for some years, at the end as managing director of two automotive suppliers. Then roughly about 7-8 years afterwards, due to some circumstances, I came back to my roots, to logistics and supply chain management and management consulting. And in the following years, we specialized more and more in our consulting business on supply chain optimization and supply chain automation, as you mentioned already. And today, besides the consulting company, we have running a software company called SCT, Supply Chain Technologies, and the training company and education platform, which is called AWF, which translates to Working Group for Economic Production in English. And besides our main office in Aachen, in Germany, we also have an office in London and an office in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And what am I doing today at the A&K Group? Well, consulting is still part of my business, but I think my main concern today is about business development.
So talking about the cost, Andreas, where everyone probably aware of that cost is one of the key measurement in the supply chain's performance. So what would be the best approach to manage and control the cost in a supply chain?
Well, when talking about costs in the supply chain, I'd say we should firstly clarify about what kind of costs are we discussing.
Yeah.
And I think we can subsume the costs into 4 categories. There are inventory carrying costs, there are ordering and other process costs, there are labor costs, and last but not least, transportation and handling costs. And to manage and to control these costs, from my experience, it doesn't really help very much to look at the costs directly. You need to look at the ultimate cost drivers. You manage these and control them. This helps you to bring the costs down at the end. And when we have a look at these the cost categories I was just talking about, then the inventory carrying costs are very much driven by inventory level, logically.
All right.
Order and other process costs are driven by process efficiency. The labor costs are driven by the amount of staff which is required in the process. And last but not least, the transportation and handling costs. They are driven by transportation and handling efforts. These efforts, again, are very much driven by technological or technical innovation, automation, and here we have usually a lot of costs before benefits start, and the costs are being reduced at the end. So in today's situation, this might not be the primary field of action, I'd say, when we talk about cost reduction, because here we have to do a lot of investments in advance. And there's one further thing we should not forget. A general cost driver, economically speaking, we'd call it factor prices. So the price for a purchased product, the price for personnel, the prices for transportation services, and so on. We should not focus on the factor prices now so much in our discussion. It's a separate approach, usually driven by the purchasing departments. And very often, in my experience, the direct price of a good or a service is too one-dimensional to look at. Purchasing should actually regard the total cost of ownership, but this is also what they tell us they do. But very often, they are just measured against the pure reduction of direct prices, and this, on the other hand, can have a substantial negative impact on the overall supply chain. So in the present situation, I'd advise to look at the factor input and improve the efficiency of the factor usage. And this means you have to keep inventory levels as low as possible without risking delivery capability.
Yeah.
You have to reduce transportation costs, and you have to increase process efficiency.
Awesome. Another question I would like to ask is first, how to find the cost improvements opportunity, and then second, can you please also tell us a few examples of the quick wins for optimizing the supply chain costs?
Okay, yeah, two very broad questions. Let me start with the first one. We just talked about the cost drivers, and you need to look at the ultimate cost drivers in order to reduce the costs. In our consulting and research work over the last years, we identified 8 core initiatives, 8 core or key cost drivers companies have to focus on in order to keep inventory levels low, reduce transportation efforts, and increase process efficiency. We call them mega stock busters. But some of these 8 initiatives, they have substantial impact on the costs, but they require a lot of time and efforts. And in order to gain quick wins, and I think in our times now, we all have to look for quick wins, we should focus on 3 initiatives which combine fast success with minimal effort. And these 3 initiatives, they are: you need to improve your forecasting process and balance the necessary service levels and the affordable safety stocks. You have to improve material replenishment mechanisms, and you have to improve master data quality and master data maintenance. This may sound boring maybe on the one hand and very technical on the other, but it helps to achieve the lowest possible cost in relation to the delivery readiness that is required. Well, this from my experience, this approach works quite fast, provided you have some experience and you have some tools to analyze the situation. When we do this ourselves in consulting projects, we apply a specific simulation tool developed by our colleagues from SCT. This tool allows us to play with parameters, with forecasting procedures, with replenishment mechanisms, and see the results on the total supply chain. I refer to this approach as a crash test for supply chain management. But it can also be handled manually with some understanding of demand planning, replenishment, and the algorithms behind this. Well, and when we talk about quick wins or examples for quick wins or the right starting points for quick wins, for a practical hands-on approach, I would advise to look at the following quite simple parameters in order to gain quick wins. I think one topic is the replenishment time. Check the replenishment time of products. Very often these times are not correct, and more than seldom they are too long, and shorter times would be possible, which directly reduces at least inventory. You need to cross-check minimal lot sizes. Very often the minimal lot sizes are much too large in relation to the amount of demand you have. You have to reduce goods entry processing times. They are partly also something that takes too much time. You have to calculate and consider economic lot sizes. This is no voodoo and no rocket science, but it needs to be done because it allows to balance inventory carrying costs and ordering and transportation costs, so a lot of process costs also. You should also check which statistical service level you really reach. When you ask the salespeople, they always say they need everything all the time. With in relation to the required inventory, then very often you get into a discussion. So you should try to balance the required service level in relation to the safety stock you can afford. And at the end, also, this is, I think, very, very important. You should try to calculate your safety stocks so that it can be automatically adapted. More important than just talking about the right formula, it's important that you have a formula that allows you to adapt. If you set your safety stocks manually, usually you touch them very rarely, you never adapt them, and most surely they are wrong. Either they are too high or too low, but they never fit to the situation. So this is also an advice I can give everybody. Really check your safety stocks and try to put a mechanism behind your safety stocks so that they can be adapted to the changing situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the real music is played by more complex parameters, but talking about these parameters, I think would break the time frame we have, and it might also be too specific for the non-specialist audience.
Awesome. So this would be our last question today. So when people think about the cost optimization, Andreas, there are always two options here. First is looking at the internal process within organization, and second is looking at the external factors like supply cost management and etc. So how do you see these situations? Which one needs to be prioritized in getting quick wins?
Yes, Nadi, this is a typical discussion about internal and external costs, but I think the distinction between internal and external cost is a classical controller's perspective. It doesn't really fit to a supply chain perspective. Supply chains don't start at a goods entry point and they don't stop at a dispatch ramp. So in economic terms, I'd say the approach also I try to outline cares about factor input on the one side and factor prices on the other. Mm-hmm. The reduction of factor prices, like prices for transportation services, for process costs, for staff, for inventory carrying, and so on. They are usually handled by the purchasing department, and as we discussed already, on the one hand, they are mainly up to date because that's a key issue for the purchasing people to care about these costs, and partly these people also tend to overemphasize the importance of prices of goods and services, which can be counterproductive in terms of supply chain excellence. Mm-hmm. If there needs to be a decision between firstly and secondly, I would therefore certainly advise to first look at the factor input and at the three initiatives that I mentioned before. The need for action in this area is larger, I think. But caring about factor input and factor prices doesn't necessarily need to be a question of first and secondly. Very often this can also be a simultaneous approach, and maybe it must be a simultaneous approach in urgent cases and in critical times like ours in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, so do you have any final thoughts or key takeaways before we close today's talk, Andreas?
Well, first I'd say don't stare at costs and wait for inspiration. Yeah. Managing and controlling supply chain costs requires to look at the mentioned mega stockbusters, primarily at improved forecasting, including a reliable sales and operations process and a consistent planning chain. Mm-hmm. Maybe another key takeaway, in order to achieve a sustainable cost reduction and not just something that works and helps for some short time, you need to continuously adapt your planning and replenishment parameters. This sounds challenging to many people, but there are tools on the market that help you to do this. And finally, maybe many supply chains are still gold-plated in my experience. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of companies that have still substantial cost-saving potential. So maybe some KPIs from our experience, roughly about 20 to 25% in inventory, 25 to 50% in planning efforts, 40 to 50% in work in process, and 40 to 65% in scrapping costs. That's what our statistics tell us. It always depends on the starting point of a company. Some companies are very professional already. Some companies have still quite some work to do, but there is usually quite some potential in the supply chains. And so I can always advise, really have a close look, a systematic look at the cost of your supply chain. There's a lot of gold to get.
Mm-hmm. All right, interesting. Okay, so thanks again, Andreas. I really enjoyed the conversation with you today. Have a great day and goodbye.
Yeah, thanks, Nohadi. It was a pleasure talking to you today. Good luck to you and your growing audience around the world, and stay safe.
At Vichara Supply Chain, we are committed to driving global perspective to embrace technological adaptation in improving process efficiencies. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Vichara Supply Chain. And stay tuned for the latest updates. To learn more, visit our website www.vicharasupplychain.com. Thank you for listening to us. We look forward to seeing you at our next episode.